We are undergoing a reorganization. I hope there are no regrets or resentments. You are aware of how the business world operates. The name I go by is Frank Delaney. I have been the one responsible for maintaining Crestwood Technologies for the past 29 years. I am 64 years old. After 29 years of arriving at 5:30 in the morning, mending what was broken, and providing training to every new employee who went through those doors, I will finally retire. When they required someone to stay late and make sure the servers didn't crash overnight, I never said no, never grumbled when they asked me to work on the weekends, and never took a sick day. I never took a sick day. There are 4 days. The only thing I had left before my full pension benefits began to take effect was that I had to wait for 4 days before I could leave that place with my head held high and my future in good hands. I have been in the military for 29 years and 11 months, and Brandon Chase just informed me that I am finished. While he was saying that, he didn't even bother to glance at me. The only thing he did was gaze at the screen of his laptop as if I were a line item on a spreadsheet that he was crossing out. A smaller than usual feeling pervaded the conference room. When the building suddenly became quiet, the fluorescent lights began to buzz overhead, just as they had done in the past. Through the glass walls, I was able to view the cubicles where the individuals whom I had educated were working. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that the one who had instructed them on how to repair the air conditioning system and demonstrated which vendors they could trust was receiving his walking papers. The reduction of the budget. Continuing, Brandon finally looked up at the ceiling. In a more efficient manner, we are progressing. Frank, this is not a personal matter. It is business. I gave a slight nod. What more was it that I was meant to do? Dispute? You beg? As a result of causing a scene, I had witnessed several males my age being removed from the scene by security. It was not going to be me doing it. The documents necessary for the termination had already been printed and were waiting in a manila folder. Things that are regular. The final computations for the paycheck, for information on Cobras. Property belonging to the company is returned. Everywhere they instructed me to sign, I did so. I used the same pen that I had been using for the previous 5 years to date everything it contained. The one that had the Crestwood logo on it and was beginning to lose its brightness. Brandon gestured with his hand and stated, "I have the badge and the keys." Taking the ID badge off of my belt, I removed the clip. This was the same location where it had resided for almost 30 years. As a result of years of being swiped through card readers, the plastic had become smooth and worn. In my employee photo, which was taken when my hair was still brown, I appeared to be younger. I had the impression that I would be able to leave this company with dignity. It seemed as though the keys were heavier than they need to be. In addition to master keys for each and every entrance in the building, there are also keys for the supply, closets, the loading dock, and the equipment rooms. My complete confidence had been placed in me. Without uttering a single word, I made my way out of the room, picked up my copy of the documents, and placed them in Brandon's hand. Just beyond, the cubicles where folks had already turned their attention away, in the direction of the break room, where I had spent the previous 29 years eating lunch at the same table. The security counter, where I had checked in thousands of times, was no longer there. The parking lot was devoid of anybody. Just like every other time my truck began on the very first attempt. I sat there for a moment, with the engine running, and I turned my attention back to the structure. For some reason, I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was that made me feel uneasy about the whole situation. It was the center of my existence from the beginning. When I was 35 years old, I had just finished going through a divorce that had cost me 50% of all I possessed. This was not a glamorous job role. As the person in charge of facilities management, it was my responsibility to maintain the plumbing when it became clogged and to ensure that the heating system functioned properly during the winter months. However, it was a reliable job that offered a nice set of benefits, and they assured me that if I remained with them, they would take care of me when I reached my senior years. During that time period, Crestwood was not very significant. Even though they had 2 buildings and possibly 50 workers, they were still attempting to figure out what kind of technology firm they wanted to be. I went to see them develop, contributed to its expansion into 4 buildings located throughout the industrial district. After they realized they required someone to supervise the construction of the new data center, they approached me with the request. Whenever the city inspectors came around with inquiries regarding the building codes, they assigned me the responsibility of addressing those inquiries. Everyone who worked in the facilities after me received training from me. They were instructed on how to read the plans, how to bargain with contractors, and how to keep everything operating without going over the allotted budget. After some time, the most of them moved on to better careers. I stayed put. This was where I belonged. It has been 8 years since my wife died away. It's cancer. Because Brandon's predecessor allowed me to take as much time as I required for doctor's appointments and hospital stays, the majority of the treatments were covered by the health insurance that the company provided. The funeral was attended by 50% of the staff when she passed away. The folks they were pleasant to be around. At the time when Brandon took over 3 years ago, he was a different person, is younger, earning a degree in business from a prestigious schools. When he looked at everything, including the individuals who had been there since before he was born, he viewed it as if it were a problem that needed to be solved. We have begun to bring in consultants in order to maximize the effectiveness of our operations, commenced discussions over the appropriate size of the workforce. If I had wanted to see the indications, they were right in front of me. As soon as Brandon walked past me in the hallway, he stopped offering his greetings. My participation in the monthly department meetings has been discontinued. In response to the budget requests that I had submitted, they contacted me with questions that I had never been required to answer before. If we needed so many maintenance contracts, what was the reason? It is possible that we could get away with fewer safety inspections. I was getting a little bit old to be climbing ladders and crawling around in equipment rooms, wasn't I? I had the impression that he was merely attempting to establish himself as the new boss. Display to everyone that he was undergoing a metamorphosis. In the past, I had witnessed it with other supervisors. Once they have a better understanding of how things are supposed to function, they will come in, make some noise, and then settle into the pattern. However, there were more things as well. There were conversations that came to a halt as soon as I entered a room, those gatherings to which I was no longer invited. A newly hired employee in the facilities department who inquired about the duties that I am responsible for. It was not necessary for him to be aware of certain things unless there was a strategy in place for him to take complete control. On my part, I ought to have paid more attention. Would have been better to ask more questions. However, I was only able to focus on completing the race because I was only 4 days away from the time when my pension would become fully effective. As I sat down at my kitchen table that evening, I had the papers for the termination of my employment sprawled out in front of me. In spite of the fact that the numbers should have added up, they did not. The calculations I did showed that I had been in duty for a total of 29 years and 11 months. According to the documentation that they provided, I was 29 years and 10 months old. When it comes to pension benefits, 1 month is missing. It was 15 years ago when they made the decision to change the retirement program, and I retrieved my old employee handbook from the drawer. There was no doubt about that. For full benefits, 30 years of service or reaching the age of 65, whichever occurred first. I was 64 years old or 29 years and 11 months old. If I had waited just 4 more days, I would have reached the age of 30. Subsequently, I recalled the message that Brandon had distributed to the entire firm just 1 month prior. I had preserved a copy because I believed it to be significant. Instructions for employees have been updated. Some clarifications on the benefits of retirement. A guarantee that the organization was dedicated to respecting all of the agreements that were already in place. Exactly where I had left it, I discovered it in the filing cabinet that I had. Beginning immediately, all calculations for retirement benefits shall be based on continuous years of service, as outlined in the employee handbook that is now in effect. It is important for employees who are getting close to retirement eligibility to verify their service records to ensure that they are accurate. I went through it 3 times. After that, I took out my calculator and began going through the pay stubs that I had received. Every single one of them. Let's go back 15 years, including sick leave, vacation days, holiday pay, and overtime compensation. All of the information was recorded. There was a total of 29 years and 11 months of service completed as of this Friday, according to everything. They had intentionally made a numerical error. Alternatively, it's possible that they hope I won't notice. There was a possibility that I might call Brandon and insist that they correct the documentation. In any case, what was the point? Already he had made it abundantly plain that I was finished. Simply giving him a call would provide him with the opportunity to devise yet another justification, an additional explanation why the regulations did not apply to the circumstances I was in. Getting a lawyer was something I considered doing, but I didn't have the financial means to do so, and going up against a large corporation that had a lot of money was a game for a young man. Janice O'Connell came to my mind at that moment. Before taking her retirement last year, she had spent the previous 12 years working in human resources at Crestwood. A woman with a sharp mind, never deviated from the rules given. Whenever it comes to employee rights, you should never allow the corporation to take shortcuts. It had been brought to my attention through the grapevine that she was currently engaged in consultancy work, assisting other businesses in avoiding the kinds of legal issues that were caused by the mistreatment of their employees. My previous contacts list contained her phone number, and I stared at it for a considerable amount of time. Should I make that call, it would be the same as confessing that I had been taken advantage of. Not only would it mean accepting what had occurred and moving on with one's life, but it would also involve fighting back. Nevertheless, as I sat there, in my kitchen, looking at pay stubs spanning 29 years and a termination letter that did not correspond to the facts, I became aware that something had changed within me. I did not feel angry. The focus was on me. I answered the phone and dialed the number. On the second ring, Janice responded to the call. It was exactly the same as I had remembered her voice, the kind of tone that made you want to tell her the truth, regardless of whether or not you intended to do so, one that was straightforward and unambiguous. She said, "Frank Delaney," before I had the opportunity to introduce myself. about what took place, I was informed. In the corporate world, word spreads quite quickly. All of the details were laid out for her. Because of the date of my termination, the disparity in the calculation of the number of years of service, and Brandon's attitude throughout the course of the past few months. She did not interrupt the speaker while she was speaking, and she asked pointed questions regarding the dates and documentation. Following my conclusion, there was a considerable pause. You stored all of your pay stubs, right? She inquired about it, one and all. Memos from the company? Are there any policy revisions? Absolutely everything that is significant. I was often reminded by my wife to maintain accurate documents. Frank, you are an astute woman, and I need you to pay close attention. Not only is what Brandon did bad, but it is also against the law. According to federal law, employees are protected against being terminated in order to prevent them from receiving benefits that they have earned. However, the time alone is not sufficient to constitute proof of it. Our intention must be made clear. It was explained to her how these cases were handled. Their claims were taken seriously by the Department of Labor. Nonetheless, they required substantial evidence, a record of details, a consistent series of actions, a factor that demonstrated that the termination was not simply the result of poor timing, but rather deliberate fraud. It was her request that everything be brought to her office on Monday morning. At Crestwood, you should avoid talking to anyone. Not a single item should be posted on social media. Do not even bother to tell your neighbors about what took place. If this continues in the direction that I expect it will, we want them to believe that they were able to get away with it. While I was driving to Janice's workplace on Monday morning, I brought 3 boxes of paperwork with me. Pay stubs, employee handbooks, memoranda, performance assessments, and printouts from emails are all examples of documents that can be printed out. A chronologically ordered collection of documentation spanning 29 years. Her approach was thorough, and she took notes on a yellow legal pad as she went through everything. The moment she reached Brandon's message from the previous month, she paused and read it twice before moving on. "This is irreplaceable," she remarked. In a written statement, he stated that the estimates for the service should be valid. After that, he terminates your employment with an incorrect computation 4 days before you reach the age of 30. It's either that he is lying or that he is incompetent. Where does the distinction lie? Your job can be earned back through incompetence. When you lie, you not only get your job back, but you also receive damages and a government inquiry that could result in the entire Human Resources Department being shut down. She walked me through the procedure. Please submit a formal complaint to the Department of Labor. During the investigation, they would meet with witnesses and examine records. Crestwood would be subject to severe fines in the event that they discovered evidence of the willful denial of benefits. There are more than just fines. It is possible that the individuals implicated may face criminal charges. Is there a time frame involved? I inquired about it. It depends. Might be a few weeks, might be a few months. On the other hand, Frank, you have to comprehend everything. It is impossible to retract this complaint once it has been submitted. Brandon is going to be aware that you did not slip away without making a sound. His response is going to be a struggle. That was the part where she was correct. During the afternoon on Tuesday, my phone rang. On the caller ID, Brandon's name is displayed. According to what I've heard, Frank, you've been discussing your firing with other people. It is my hope that you are not going to engage in any foolish behavior. I did not make any statements. I understand that you are quite upset. Nevertheless, we adhered to the company's policy to the letter. It appears that you have been in service for 29 years and 10 months. Right now, I have the papers in my possession. The paperwork, that is, your date of employment. This date is January 15th, 1996, when your employment will end. The 8th of November, 2024. Simple mathematics, Frank. He was lying, and I knew it. Crestwood was where I began my employment on December 15th, 1995. I had the letter of offer to demonstrate my claim. Brandon, on the other hand, was preparing his case by attempting to convince me to quarrel with him over the phone so that he could have complete control over the conversation. My response was that I was not looking for trouble. That's good. I am pleased to learn that, since we would be required to defend ourselves in the event that someone were to bring a complaint against the company that was completely without merit. In addition, in order to defend ourselves, we might have to examine the work history of that individual in great detail, making certain that they have never broken any business policies, never taken anything that did not belong to them, and never said anything that could have been detrimental to the reputation of the particular organization. The menace was unmistakable. If I refused to fight back, they would ruin any remnants of my reputation that were left. It is clear to me, I replied, and then I hung up. On the other hand, I was confused. No, not really. The reason for this is that Brandon was unaware of the fact that Janice had already submitted the complaint earlier that morning. During the evening of Wednesday, Janice called me with news that completely altered everything. It was said by her that the Department of Labor moved quickly on this matter. Some time had passed since they had begun watching Crestwood. It seems that you are not the first one to experience something like this. It was the investigator who was assigned to my case that she had spoken with. During the course of the previous 2 years, Crestwood had successfully terminated the employment of 3 additional long-term employees within a few months of their eligibility for full pension benefits. Every single one of them was in their 60s. Every one of them had service records that had been calculated incorrectly for some unexplainable reason. Janice has indicated that they are referring to it as a pattern, denying benefits on a massive scale. This is the kind of behavior that causes an organization to get placed on a federal watch list. On the other hand, there was more. It was requested by the investigator that personnel files be provided for all 4 employees who had been terminated. Something that they discovered was a string of emails that Brandon had sent to the new director of Human Resources. In these emails, they discussed methods to improve the efficiency of the workforce and lower the amount of long-term benefit responsibilities. Janice remarked that they were not even intelligent about it, utilized the company's email, referred to particular workers by their own names. Over the course of the last 3 months, your name has been referenced 6 times. There was a chilling sensation that settled into my gut. To what extent did they criticize me? Considering that you were a legacy cost, that the benefits you receive from your pension and health insurance would constitute a major continuous liability for you, that it is possible that your post may be eliminated and that your responsibilities will be moved to other members of the team. They had been making preparations for so many months. When I arrived early and stayed till the very end of the day, during the time that I was instructing new employees and resolving their issues, it was their intention to find a way to get rid of me without having to pay the money that they owed. Janice proceeded by saying that there was something else. On Thursday morning, the investigator would like to have an interview with you. Someone who works in the criminal section is going to be brought forth. Are you a criminal? To clarify, Frank, the situation is not merely a civil concern when an employer voluntarily fires people in order to avoid paying them benefits that they have earned. It's a falsehood. If they planned it via electronic communications, it would be considered wire fraud. Those who were involved may be sentenced to prison. A conference room in the downtown office of the Department of Labor was where I found myself sitting on Thursday morning. 2 investigators, both of whom were younger than my son, were all dressed in suits that cost more than the amount of money I spent on clothing in a single year. Everything was documented by them, questioned me about my employment history, and asked me to go through it year by year. It displayed printouts of emails that I had never seen before. Janice's description of the emails was worse than the actual emails. My termination was not the only topic that Brandon and the Director of Human Resources had discussed that day. There was a discussion about firing anyone who was on the verge of becoming eligible for a pension. They referred to it as labor force management that was proactive. They were in possession of a spreadsheet that contained names, dates, and anticipated savings. Using the evidence that we have gathered, one of the investigators, Mr. Delaney, stated that we have reason to think that Crestwood Technologies was involved in a systematic plot to defraud many employees of benefits that they had earned. Your case is merely the most recent illustration of this. Documents that I had never seen before were presented to me with internal company messaging about the cost of sustaining senior employees. Renegotiating pension liabilities is the subject of these memos. A slide labeled Legacy Employee Transition Strategy was included in the presentation that was given to the Board of Directors. That slide contained not only my name, but also the names of the 3 other employees who had been eliminated from their positions. Each and every one of us was included in the Q4 optimization targets. The other investigator stated that we are going to require your testimony in this matter. This will be brought before a federal court for trial. Accountability will be exercised with regard to the individuals responsible. I couldn't help but think about Brandon, who was there in that conference room and telling me that it was nothing personal and that it was just business. I reflected on the 29 years that I had spent getting up before daybreak, repairing things that were broken, and having faith that my commitment would be rewarded. What is it that you require me to do? No one anticipated that the federal inquiry would move as quickly as it did. Investigators had confiscated Crestwood's email servers by the following Monday, and they had conducted interviews with 6 of the company's current employees. The search warrant had been carried out by Wednesday, and it had been executed on Brandon's office as well as the Human Resources Department. I was maintained up to date on everything by Janice. After gathering a large amount of evidence, the detectives were at a loss on what to do with it. There are documents hidden within the company that date back 3 years and demonstrate a methodical plot to get rid of elderly workers. Excel spreadsheets that calculate savings for retirement, email conversations that explore the optimal point in time to terminate employees in order to minimize legal problems. While we were having coffee on Thursday morning, Janice informed me that they maintained records on everything. They seemed to be trying to avoid being discovered. The plan was straightforward and ruthless. Identify employees who are getting close to being eligible for pensions. Determine the reasons that call their performance or necessity into doubt. They should be terminated just prior to the receipt of their benefits, to save millions of dollars in long-term costs. It had been presented to the board by Brandon as a need from a financial standpoint. However, Pension liabilities were eating into profits, despite the fact that the company was expanding. Employees who were younger had lower insurance premiums and did not need to make long-term commitments to their benefits. It was a fundamental aspect of business mathematics. The fact that someone like me would be maintaining meticulous notes was something he had not anticipated. You may also have someone like Janice who is familiar with federal employment law. Alternatively, detectives who would take benefit fraud seriously. I received another call from Brandon on Friday afternoon. The sound of his voice was different, this time. Pitch that is higher. Feeling anxious. I believe there has been a misunderstanding over the termination of your employment, Frank. We ought to have a conversation. Attempt to find a solution. To what extent is this a misunderstanding? The history of your service. There is a possibility that we made a mistake in the calculation. We would be able to accomplish everything if you were willing to come in on Monday morning. See to it that you are given what you are due. He was in a state of panic. The probe was now open to the public, mentioned in the section of the newspaper that is dedicated to business. In just 2 days, Crestwood's stock price had plunged by 15%. Those on the board were asking Brandon questions that he was unable to answer. Having stated that, I do not believe that to be necessary. You, Frank, please. For years we have collaborated on projects. We should handle things in a professional manner, nothing from the government or the legal system. There are just two normal people trying to work out their differences. However, it was already too late to be feasible. Already, charges had been brought up by the Department of Labor. Rather than merely civil charges, criminal charges too. Brandon was facing charges of wire fraud and conspiracy to defraud employees of earned benefits, which could have resulted in a maximum sentence of 5 years in federal prison. My phone rang on Monday morning, and it was the attorney for the corporation, not Brandon, the actual lawyer for the corporation, who was brought in as things became more serious. To Mr. Delaney, my client would want to discuss the possibility of reaching a settlement, which would include the complete reinstatement of your pension benefits, health care coverage, and additional compensation for the difficulty you have recently endured. Is there any more remuneration available? We are willing to make a $50,000 offer, provided that you agree to refrain from taking any further legal action. I informed him that I will keep that in mind. I then dialed Janice's number. Instantaneously, she responded, "Do not take it. It's true they are terrified. The criminal charges are only the first step in the process. As soon as this is brought before the federal court, additional workers are likely to come forward. A class action lawsuit with a potential value of millions of dollars is to be filed." She was absolutely correct. As of Tuesday, the Department of Labor has received calls from 8 additional current and former workers of Crestwood who had the suspicion that their terminations or benefit computations were false. The time was 15 by Thursday. A story about it was picked up by the local news. A local IT company is the focus of a federal probe. The photograph of Brandon appeared on the main page of the business section. He appeared to be suffering from discomfort while wearing a suit that appeared to be too big for him. As far as I was concerned, all I had to do was wait. In every respect, the system was functioning precisely as it was intended to function. In addition, Brandon was going to experience what it was like to have someone else make decisions about your trajectory in life. By the time my phone rang on Tuesday morning, I was sitting there with a cup of coffee and reading the newspaper. The call from Janice came way earlier than normal. She instructed me to turn to Channel 6, right now. I located the remote control and changed the channel to the local news. Handcuffs were being used to lead Brandon Chase out of the Crestwood building to his destination. The federal officials who were following him were carrying boxes of documents. At the time, the reporter was discussing allegations of wire fraud, as well as a scheme to rob employees of benefits that they had earned. For the purpose of terminating long-term employees just before they became eligible for full pension payments, federal prosecutors alleged that Chase and Human Resources Director Patricia Walsh engaged in a systematic strategy to do so, according to the reporter. The employees who were affected by the alleged scam cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in benefits that they had earned. While the agents assisted Brandon in getting into a car belonging to a federal marshal, the video captured him making a little stumble. The normally flawless appearance of his hair was a mess, and his face was pale. He appeared to be much smaller than I had recalled. The reporter continued by saying that the indictment accuses Chase with 14 counts of conspiracy and wire fraud. If found guilty, he may be sentenced to up to 70 years in federal prison. I sat for a while in the peace and quiet of my kitchen after turning off the television. 29 years of getting up before daylight, of repairing things that were damaged, and of feeling that loyalty was important. It was significant, but not in the sense that I had anticipated. Janice returned the phone an hour later with additional information. The inquiry that had been conducted by the Department of Labor concluded. The project had an impact on the employment of 18 workers. Damages of more than $2 million were incurred. The board of directors of Crestwood had decided to promptly terminate Brandon and Walsh, and they had also agreed to provide full reparations to all of the employees who were harmed. She informed you that your pension has been fully restored, with benefits associated with health care and additional compensation for damages, and that it has been backdated to the time when it should have vested. Is there any more remuneration available? $250,000 in addition to your legal fees. When I thought about Brandon, I imagined him telling me that it was nothing personal, just business, and that it was just the way things worked. After a period of 3 months, I found myself heading back to my workshop to construct a bookcase for my daughter. I enjoyed the way the tools felt in my hands. I was reminded of the reasons why I had always been adept at fixing things by the smell of sawdust and the sound of wood being sculpted into something useful. The beginning of my pension payments had occurred just as planned. My savings account was able to accumulate interest on the additional salary that I received. So far, I hadn't even touched it. I wasn't sure if that was necessary. Having worked consistently for the past 29 years, I had everything I required. A sentence of 18 months in prison had been handed down to Brandon after he entered a guilty plea to federal charges. Patricia Walsh was placed on probation for a period of 6 months and 2 years. After the acquisition of Crestwood by a larger corporation, the management ranks were reorganized to make room for new employees. There was a follow-up article about the case that was published in the local newspaper. The complaint of a local resident was the impetus for the federal probe. However, I denied their request to have an interview with me. Neither attention nor recognition was something I was seeking for. All I wanted was what I had worked so hard to get. During the time that I was sanding the bookcase, my daughter called me. She was concerned about my well-being after reading the news article that was posted on the internet. She praised her father, saying, "I am proud of you, Dad, for standing up for yourself." I informed her that I had not done anything truly remarkable. I just took a call on the phone. In some cases, that is sufficient. That afternoon, I loaded the bookshelf into my truck after I had done putting it together. I finally had the time to construct it in the way that she wanted it after my daughter had been requesting it for a number of months. It was made of solid oak and had dovetailed joints. It was the kind of item that would survive for decades. As I was driving to her house, I reflected about the distinction between constructing something from scratch and merely repairing something that had been broken by another person. Both had their role to play. Both were important. Creating something fresh, on the other hand, felt better.